Some assignments don't come with danger. They come with absence. My name is Daniel. I worked private contract security for 11 years. Before that, I did 6 years in the Army, military police, 2 deployments, lower tone. I'm telling you this so you understand the baseline. I'm trained in threat assessment. I'm trained to observe environments accurately and report what I observe without embellishment. I don't frighten easily. I don't invent things. I have no reason to tell you what I'm about to tell you except that it happened, and I've spent 4 years trying to make sense of it, and I've run out of other options. In 2019, I was contracted through a private security firm based out of Richmond, Virginia. The company's name was Hargrove Sentinel Group. Mid-sized operation, about 140 employees, mostly former law enforcement and military. Good outfit, professional. I'd been with them for 3 years at that point, long enough to be considered reliable, long enough to get assigned to what they called elevated contracts. That's what this was, an elevated contract. The assignment was a facility in rural Western Virginia, about 40 minutes outside of Staunton, off a 2-lane state road that wasn't marked on most maps. I was told the site was a decommissioned transit relay terminal, a mid-century government facility that had been used for coordinating freight and communications routing during the Cold War era. The official story was that it had been decommissioned in 1987 and was in the process of being assessed for historical preservation. My job was overnight security, Sunday through Thursday, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I was to be the only person on site during those hours. I want to be precise about what the facility looked like. It was a single-story concrete structure, roughly rectangular, approximately 200 feet by 80 feet. There was one main entrance at the front, with a heavy steel door and a keypad lock. There were 4 secondary exits, all sealed from the inside with crossbar mechanisms that could only be opened from within. The building had been stripped of most of its original equipment. What remained was a long central corridor running the full length of the building, a series of rooms branching off on both sides, and at the far end, a large open area that I was told had functioned as the main operations floor. The ceiling in the corridor was about 9 feet. The ceiling in the operations area was significantly higher, maybe 16 or 18 feet. There was still electrical power running through the building, though most of the light fixtures in the side rooms were dead. The corridor and the operations area had functional fluorescent lighting. My first week was uneventful. I did my check-ins every 2 hours on a radio channel provided by Hargrove. The channel connected directly to a dispatch operator named Carol. Carol was professional and brief. Check-in acknowledged. Anything to report. Nothing to report. Logging. Every 2 hours, the same exchange. I patrolled the corridor at the top of each hour, checked the secondary exits, returned to the security desk at the front entrance, and logged the patrol. Standard procedure. I want to note something about the building during those first few nights. It was quiet in a way that I noticed, not the ordinary quiet of an empty building. In my 11 years of contract security, I'd spent hundreds of nights alone in empty buildings. Office buildings, warehouses, processing plants. They have their own sounds. HVAC systems cycling, pipes settling, rodents in the walls. Even an empty building is never truly silent. This facility was different. It was quiet in a way that felt considered. Like the silence wasn't an absence of sound, but a specific condition the building was maintaining. I mentioned it to Carol on the second night during a check-in. I said the building was unusually quiet. She said she'd note it in the log. I didn't pursue it further. The first thing I noticed that I couldn't immediately explain happened on the 8th night. I was halfway through a corridor patrol at around 2 a.m. when I walked past one of the side rooms on the left. I don't know what made me stop. I hadn't heard anything, but I stopped and looked at the door. The rooms were generally left open during my patrols. This one was closed. I was certain it had been open on my previous pass. I checked the door. It wasn't locked. I opened it and looked inside. The room was empty. Nothing in it but a concrete floor and 3 dead fluorescent tubes overhead. No reason the door should have been closed. I documented it in my log, noted the time, the room number, the condition of the door. I'm trained to document anomalies even when they're likely to have a mundane explanation. A draft from a gap somewhere in the building's exterior could have swung the door. Cold War-era construction wasn't always airtight. I moved on, but the door was open again on my next patrol, exactly as it had been before. I tested it on the following night. Before I began my midnight patrol, I propped the door open with a folded piece of cardboard I pulled from my bag. When I passed by it on the next patrol, the cardboard was on the floor and the door was closed again. There was no draft strong enough to dislodge that cardboard without also making some noise. I hadn't heard anything. I reported it to my shift supervisor at Hargrove during my end-of-shift debrief. He told me to keep documenting it and said they'd send someone out to check the building's ventilation during the following week. Nobody came. The door continued to behave the same way every night for the next week. And then something else started. Around the 3rd week, something changed in how the building felt to move through. It stopped being consistent. Certain rooms on the left side of the corridor didn't just feel off anymore. They started reacting to my patrol schedule. I first noticed it at 1:40 a.m. A room I had passed twice earlier that night felt completely normal both times. But on that 3rd pass, I stopped mid-step without thinking. The air felt compressed, not colder, not warmer, just tighter, like the space inside the room had been reduced. I stood outside the door and checked my thermometer. Same reading as everywhere else. I opened the door anyway. Nothing inside. Empty concrete floor. Dead fluorescent fixtures. But when I stepped back into the corridor, the feeling dropped instantly, like it had never been there at all. That's what made it difficult to ignore. It wasn't constant. It was selective. I started testing it. On each patrol, I slowed down near the same section of corridor and paid attention to my body's reaction before I even looked at the rooms. And every night, the same thing started happening in different places. Never the same room twice in a row, but always within the same stretch of hallway. Left side only. Midpoint to operations floor. By the end of the week, I stopped walking it like a routine patrol and started walking it like a pattern I was trying to catch in real time. That's when I made the sketch. 9 rooms. All on the left side. All within the same line toward the far end of the building. At first I thought I was mapping a coincidence, but then I realized something worse. The pattern wasn't spreading randomly. It was moving forward. 1 room at a time, in the same direction I was walking every night, toward the operations floor. The 4th week was when I stopped trusting the building to stay the same between patrols. I tested it directly. Before my midnight patrol, I marked one of the active rooms with a small piece of chalk on the doorframe. Nothing obvious, just a single line at eye level. I didn't tell dispatch. I wanted clean data. On the next loop, I checked it. The mark was gone. Not smudged, not faded, gone completely. The door itself was closed, which was unusual for that room. I was certain it had been open when I passed it earlier. I made a note and kept moving. 10 minutes later, I came back to verify. The door was open again. Same room, same position. But the air inside felt wrong in a way I can't fully explain. I stepped in, checked the walls, checked the floor, checked the ceiling. Nothing physically changed. But my flashlight beam didn't behave normally. It didn't scatter the same way in the corners, like the room wasn't reflecting light consistently. I radioed Carol and reported a possible electrical or structural issue affecting visibility in one of the side rooms. She logged it without asking questions. That night, the first real incident happened on the operations floor. At approximately 4:15 a.m., I heard movement again. Same sound as before, slow sliding across concrete. Controlled, deliberate. I went straight to the corridor entrance. The operations floor lights were off. I had not touched them. I checked the wall switches. All of them were in the on position. I flipped them once. Nothing. I flipped them again. Nothing. Then, without warning, every light in the operations floor turned on at the same time. No flicker, no delay. Just immediate, synchronized activation. And in that same second, the sliding sound stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Like whatever was moving had realized I was there. I stood at the threshold longer than I should have. The room was empty again. But now I understood something I didn't before. It wasn't random movement. It was timing itself around my presence. When I stepped back into the corridor, Carol came over the radio. She asked if I was still reporting an intrusion. I paused before answering, because for the first time, I wasn't sure what word applied anymore. So I just said, "No, clear." And I didn't go back to the desk right away. I stayed in the corridor longer than protocol allowed, just listening, to see if it would start again. In the 5th week, the rooms along the left side of the corridor that I had been marking in my sketch started to feel different at different times during a single patrol. Not different from each other, different from themselves. A room that had felt neutral on the 11 p.m. patrol would have that pressure quality at 1 a.m. and be neutral again by 3 a.m. As if whatever was causing the sensation was moving through the building, not staying still. Covering the same ground I was covering on patrol, but at its own pace, on its own schedule. I didn't sleep well during those weeks. Not during the day when I was supposed to be sleeping, and not in the building, though I wasn't supposed to sleep on shift anyway. Something about the facility had changed the way darkness felt to me outside of it, the way you might feel after a long illness, like your body is no longer quite sure what normal is. In the 6th week, I came back from a corridor patrol at 1 a.m., sat down at the security desk, and found that my logbook was open to a different page than I'd left it. I keep a logbook with a habit I developed in the Army. I close it and set it at a specific angle to the edge of the desk when I leave the desk, so I can tell at a glance if it's been moved. It had been moved, and it was open to the sketch I'd drawn of the building layout, the one with the 9 rooms marked. There was a mark on the sketch that I had not made, a single small dot drawn in pencil in the middle of the operations floor. I sat at that desk for a long time. I did not call Carol. I did not radio anyone. I sat and looked at the dot in the middle of my sketch, and I tried to construct a rational explanation. I could have drawn the dot myself without remembering it. Cognitive fatigue during overnight shifts can produce gaps in short-term memory. It's documented. I was aware of that. I could have opened the logbook myself during the patrol for reasons I didn't retain. The angle I'd set it at could have shifted when the building's structure settled. 2 or 3 of those explanations together might account for what I was looking at. I closed the logbook. I set it at the corner of the desk. I finished the shift. I handed in my resignation to Hargrove the following morning. I told them it was a personal matter. I did not tell them what I'd seen in the logbook. I did not tell them about the pressure in the rooms, or the lights, or the sliding sound on the operations floor. I put in my 2 weeks, and I didn't go back to that facility again. 3 months later, I tried to find Carol. Not her full name, I didn't have it, but I called Hargrove's dispatch line and asked to speak with the overnight dispatcher from the Western Virginia contract. I was told there was no dispatcher named Carol on their overnight team. I said she'd been my check-in contact for a 6-week assignment in 2019. They said they'd look into it and call me back. They didn't. 6 months after that, I submitted a records request through the Virginia Department of Historic Resources for any preservation assessment files related to Cold War-era federal facilities in Augusta County. The response I received said no such files existed in their records for that period or that location. I've thought about this often in the years since, about what the facility actually was, about who contracted Hargrove to post a guard there and why, about what was in that building that required watching, and whether the watching was meant to be done by me or done to me. I've thought about the dot on the sketch, about whether it was communicating something or just marking something. The distinction matters, but I haven't been able to determine which it was. What I keep coming back to is this. In 11 years of security work, I was never assigned to a facility that subsequently had no record of existing. I was never assigned to a job where the dispatcher couldn't be located afterward. I was never in a building where something felt like it was learning my patrol routes the same way I was learning them. I don't know what that terminal was. I don't know who built it, or what it was used for, or why someone decided it needed an overnight guard in 2019. I don't know why there's no record of it. What I know is that for 6 weeks, I showed up every night, walked that corridor, checked those doors, and logged what I found. And something in that building was doing the same thing. Showing up. Walking the same path I was walking. Logging me. I resigned because I wasn't sure anymore which one of us was the security guard.